Can your colour television answer you back? This pie set with Teletext can. Ask it some questions.
How did Everton do?
Everton 1, Stoke 1.
What's the latest news?
Very likely.
Tomorrow's weather.
Looking up, and Pi Teletext can answer thousands more questions like these. Pi Teletext with full remote control from around £375. Shouldn't your next colour TV answer you back?
I'm Carl Attrell, and this is Teletext People. In this episode we speak to Steve Rosenberg. He is Russia editor of BBC News and also set up a fledgling teletext service at the fall of the Soviet Union. I started by asking Steve what got him into teletext in the first place.
So my interest in teletext goes way back to, I'd say, probably 1975, when I was about 7 years old. And I remember, I used to watch a lot of telly, when I was little. I'd sit in front of the television set, and I remember, it must have been around 1975, when the BBC showed this kind of promotional film about teletext, about CFAX. I think This Is CFAX or something like that. And I remember Angela Rippon presented it, the newsreader. And I was spellbound. I was totally spellbound, because here she was talking about this kind of electronic newspaper that appeared on the television screen.
A team of BBC engineers have been helping to plan what can best be described as a revolution. A revolution, that is, in communication, and one that will reach straight into the home through that familiar piece of furniture, the television set. What's involved is a program system of an entirely new kind, for this one has been designed quite deliberately to put the ultimate power into the hands of every individual member of the viewing audience. The power, that is, to choose not just which part of the program you want to watch, but also when. And it's all done at the touch of a button.
I thought, well, this is really space age. Anyway, it must have been another 5 years later that Dad, popped down to Radio Rentals and got the latest television set, which had a teletext decoder in it. So there we had CFAX, an Oracle, in our living room, and it was amazing. And I just spent hours keying in page numbers and looking at all the information you could get through teletext. And I loved it to such an extent. I used to write down, I used to go to page 101 on CFAX, and I used to write down every day all the headlines on CFAX page 101 in a diary. So I've got this stack of diaries here, my news diaries, which are basically made up of the headlines on page 101 CFAX, which is quite fun to look back on all these years later. But I really loved it. Anyway, when I was a bit older, maybe 16, 17, I wrote to CFAX and told them how much I loved CFAX and would there be any chance of having any work experience in the CFAX newsroom or summer jobs, and they eventually crumbled and said yes. So I went to Television Centre, signed a contract, and did some summer work there, and it was just brilliant being part of the CFAX team, if only for a little bit. And then I did more summer jobs for them. I remember I worked on the sports desk during the Commonwealth Games, and gave kind of updates for some of the Commonwealth Games sports events. I absolutely loved it. And I tell you what, actually, when I was writing stories, like news stories or sports stories at CFAX, it was such a good training for what was going to come in the future, right? For when I'm writing radio dispatches, or even when I'm tweeting today, kind of little news stories. Because, of course, the one thing that teletext teaches you is to be pretty concise when you're writing those 3 or 4 paragraphs. Anyway, then I contacted Intelfax to see if they had any opportunities, openings for summer work. This is when I was already at university studying Russian. I went to university in Leeds, but I'd come back to London. I'm from North London, during the vacations, and I did stints at Intelfax on Foretel, doing TV listings and TV reviews and things like that, and that was amazing too. And I met so many talented people, especially like the graphics, the people who did the graphics. There were some incredible graphics made. I mean, both at CFAX and Intelfax. What was the name of the Ian? I think
Ian Irving.
Ian Irving. Yeah, he was a master of graphics. So yeah, that was my in to the world of teletext. I always knew that I wanted to work in broadcasting, in some form of broadcasting. So I finished my course, my Russian course up in Leeds, and I went out to Moscow to work in August 1991. And my first job was teaching English at the Moscow Machine Tool Construction Institute. I got a job teaching English there, and I was living in the hostel. And then suddenly the Soviet Union fell apart, right? I mean, about 4 or 5 months after I arrived in Moscow. So that was unexpected. There was lots of news, obviously, and I got a job with American television just in the evenings answering the phone. And then I discovered that at the Moscow TV tower, they were doing experimental broadcasts, teletext broadcasts. There wasn't a proper service. It was all experimental. So I went to the Moscow TV tower one morning and managed to get in and meet the man who was in charge of their teletext experiments. He was really surprised to see me. This kind of Englishman had popped up at the Moscow TV tower asking about teletext. Anyway, when I said that I'd worked at British Teletext, he was suddenly quite interested. So he introduced me to his team, and he showed me the equipment. It was all very basic stuff. And there was no kind of magazine or anything like that. It was all experimental. And I'm not quite sure how it happened, but they offered me a job doing like a proper service. So I created Mostext, which was like Russia's first teletext service. This was part of the Moscow TV tower. So that was fun, but that lasted about 3 or 4 months. And some friends came to help me with that, and we created Mozzie. Like 40 had the dog as the emblem. Yeah. So we created Mozzie for Mostext, this Russian bear, which was quite fun. So at that point, I thought, right, no, I need to do this properly, or as properly as I can possibly try. So I set up a company and managed to negotiate a deal with Russian state television. The Soviet Union had collapsed, and Russian state television was kind of the new channel to represent independent Russia, the new Russia. And I got a deal with them to do the first proper regular teletext service. I got some funding from the European Union, which allowed me to buy some equipment, some teletext equipment from Intelfax. They sent that out. Some university friends came over to help me, and we set up in a room at Russian state television to do, I think it was 3 teletext services. There was RTEL, which was the Russian language one. There was RTEL, and there was an extra one, I think Eurotel for the European Union. So there we were with a couple of keyboards, and we had an Atom from Intelfax, and it was enormous fun. I did this for a year, and the one thing I learnt at the end of it was that I am not a businessman. We didn't earn a penny. We didn't earn a penny. And the funny thing was that all the kind of the senior officials at Russian state television, who kept poking their heads around the door, they must have thought, oh look, there are some foreigners. They must be earning millions and millions of dollars or pounds or whatever with this project. We weren't earning anything. We were just losing money. But it was such fun to do these teletext services. We did news. We managed to get news, I think, from Reuters. We did travel reports. We did weather. There was a fun page, of course, with his jokes, and it was just enormous fun. But sadly, inevitably, I realised that my pockets are empty. I can't carry on doing this because it's a financial disaster, and I realised I had to get myself a proper job, a regular job. I'd left the institute, the teaching job. So I eventually went back to American television, to CBS, and got a kind of a regular job there. That led to the BBC in Moscow in '97, where I became a producer and then a reporter and a correspondent. And I've been with the BBC, ever since. But I always look back with great fondness at my days trying to make it with Russian teletext. And it's a fun story to tell people. Very few people know, actually.
Just a reminder that if you're listening to this on your favourite podcast app, you can also find this on the YouTube channel. And if you are watching on YouTube, you can find us on your favourite podcasting app. You can find out ways that you can help with the show in the show notes. So with the with the Russian services, then was that carrying Cyrillic text, or was that carrying sort of like a European text?
So we did several services. So there was a Cyrillic service in Russian, RTEL, Россия Tel, Russia Tel. That was done in Russian. Then we did an English language service, the RTEL, and then I think the Eurotel may have been in Cyrillic as well. So that was quite tough. Russian state television, I think, provided some people to help us with the Cyrillic services. And we basically taught them all we knew at the time about what teletext was and how to do it and how to arrange it and how a teletext page should look like, because, of course, that takes some time to get used to, making one. And, it was really good. I never actually took my equipment back. The equipment that I bought with that European Union money, I think it must still be at Russian TV now, although I doubt that they're still doing a teletext service with it. But, yeah.
Yeah. So did you have quite a following? Were there many viewers that used to get back in touch?
It's a good question, actually, Carl, because, of course, there were no, surveys on teletext at the time, so it was very difficult to know how many people were watching us. I remember we had problems transmitting in Moscow. For some reason, once I moved away from the TV tower and set up with Russian state television, the TV tower, I think, was preventing us from actually transmitting in the Moscow area. So we were going outside of Moscow, across Russia, and to former Soviet republics. And we would get letters from time to time from all kinds of places, actually, because we ran competitions, I remember, because it was one way of trying to find out who was watching us. And we get letters from all over the place. Yeah? But it was difficult to say how many people were actually watching us, because there weren't too many decoders in television sets in Russia at the time. Do you know, in Soviet times, of course, there were no teletext decoders in Soviet television sets, which tended to explode. I think exploding television sets was one of the main causes of house fires. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, yes, then you had Western electronics coming into Russia big time. So eventually, yes, televisions with teletext decoders were on the market, and most of the Russian-made electronic equipment, television sets, for example, kind of disappeared. So many companies went bankrupt. So many Russian companies closed down in the 1990s. It was a very difficult time for the country and for the Russian economy. But there were lots of Western goods coming into the country. So eventually, the number of teletext decoders increased. But I think, whereas teletext began in the 70s, right, in the UK. It all began much later, of course, in Russia. So by the time things got going, the internet age, had started. So sadly, Russia, I think, missed what we enjoyed so much in the UK. We had 30, 40 good years of teletext in Britain, and it became such a part of our lives, didn't it? And so popular with viewers. That never really happened, sadly, in Russia. Already, the internet age was upon us, so that made a big difference.
Yeah. So, did anyone continue the reins after you left to go to CBS? Did anyone else stay to keep the service running?
I think that Russian state television kept it on, so they took it over basically after we departed. But I don't think it became a big thing. I don't think so. I never actually met anyone who'd seen it or used it, which is a bit sad. Now, I don't know whether that's anything to do with it must have something to do with the fact that it started much later. I think. Yeah.
Would it be a cultural thing as well with dissemination of information at all? Would it be that the appetite to read something that was coming to you on a television, I don't know, would be treated in a different way, maybe to somebody looking at saying in the UK?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, Russians are avid readers, right? I mean, you have to be an avid reader to get through Tolstoy's War and Peace, right? Which is such a massive book. And I remember when I was studying in Soviet Moscow, right, in 1989, in my year out, and I travel on the underground, on the metro, and everybody would be reading, whether it's a book or a newspaper. People here are avid readers. There's no doubt about it. Today, of course, it's very different. You go into the metro and people are looking at their phones, not reading newspapers, not reading books so much. But there is a culture of reading and the written word here. So I don't think it's a question of that. I think just things got going much later. Television started here later than it did in Britain. And so everything started a bit later. And as I say, when I went to the television tower in Moscow in 91, they were just doing experiments in teletext transmissions, whereas, teletext had begun when it's regular transmission, right, in the UK or something like that. So Britain was really leading the world in that.
What was the most favourite thing that you did? You mentioned you did 3 services. What was the thing that you enjoyed doing the most on the services? Was it the graphics, or was it the sports pages, or anything like that?
I think it was the jokes page. I mean, you need a sense of humour to survive in this country, and you need a bit of a laugh. And so we all enjoyed doing the jokes, and we had a great guy called Simon who was at university with me, who was brilliant with graphics, and he did wonderful graphics to go with the jokes page, and that was nice. But going back to when I was at the television tower and in these experimental teletext transmissions, I think I still have a soft spot for Mozzie the bear, and I've got somewhere in a dusty cupboard, some photographs that we took off the screen of Mostext and Mozzie the bear, which didn't come out very well, but I still look at them from time to time and bring a smile to my face, But I realised that to make it work, you needed to be basically not only a fan of teletext, but a businessman as well, and none of us were. We did it for the love of teletext, and we really enjoyed creating something new that hadn't existed before, and that was fun. But fun didn't pay the bills, unfortunately. We were young and we were enthusiastic, and we had a lot of fun. But it was inevitably going to come to an end, I think.
Yeah, it must be something in the British psyche that we all love our sheds, don't we? But whenever money gets involved, the wheels come off, and then someone else comes to the rescue, normally from abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was fresh out of university. I was full of enthusiasm, and I've still got a lot of enthusiasm, I have to say. But I thought, why not try and do it? And we did do it, and it was an achievement at the time. I'll never forget the time that it was Christmas, and we thought we'd better kind of take out the bosses of Russian state television and show willing, and so we went to, I think it may have been a British pub or something similar in Moscow. There used to be things like that here in the 90s, and we sort of treated them to some sandwiches and some beverages, and I remember sitting there, and then the beverages were brought and disappeared within seconds, and then they were waiting for the next round, and so I don't know how much we spent buttering them up that evening, but I think we almost went bankrupt with our little Christmas do there. But no, it was great fun. I mean, to be able to say now that I set up a company and got a deal with Russian state TV and did teletext, it's good fun. And I love the fact that I went on to become a BBC journalist. And as I say, I always wanted to work for the BBC, and I always loved teletext. So in a way, kind of going on to work for the BBC in Moscow and producing reports, and it brought me full circle, really. And as I say, the training in teletext stood me in good stead for what I do now, I think, and I'll always be grateful for that. And maybe it's nostalgia, but I really think there's something special about teletext. And I know the internet's wonderful, and I know you select a page and it comes up instantly, and that's great. And with teletext, you had to wait a few seconds, but there was something beautiful about the simplicity, about the simple layout. There was something just beautiful about the news flash page, 150. That it was a very special thing, and it was at the time, it was the only way you'd get the latest information, wasn't it? So I was sad when it was finally turned off. I think it was sad to see that era going. Maybe it's just nostalgia, and I'm thinking back to childhood. But I really miss teletext, miss CFAX. There aren't many people that I know here who are interested in stories about teletext, but it was a special moment in my life. And as I say, I've got a soft spot for teletext and for CFAX and for what we try to do here in the crazy 1990s. The 1990s was a totally crazy decade in Russia. It was a time, just after the fall of the Soviet Union, when there was chaos, when millions of people fell into poverty, when you had the oligarchs, this small group of people becoming super rich overnight through their connections, becoming oligarchs. You had crime, you had shootouts, but you also had hope. There were people hoping because of freedom of speech, because there were television channels criticising the government. So there was hope that Russia was somehow going to make it to a better place. And amid all this kind of chaos, there was little old me, or little young me, trying to set up a teletext service. Well, it was all against me, wasn't it, really? But I mean, it was fun to try. And, I think I must have done RTEL for about a year. We gave it about a year. And Intelfax was great. And, they not only provided or sold the equipment, but they provided all the technical support. We had some issues and they sorted them out, and they provided a lot of support. But they couldn't turn me into a businessman and make me succeed. But I'm proud of what we did.
I only know a couple of bits of Russian, and that's spasiba and do svidaniya.
Yes,
so,
very good.
So yeah,
very good. All right.
Yeah, do svidaniya, and thank you very much again, Steve. Stay safe. Stay safe.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.
You have been listening to Teletext People. Teletext People is presented by me, Carl Attrell, and is a Byte High No Limit production. If you want to help with the hosting of this podcast, please look in the programme notes where you can click a link and just send us a tip.